4 words: tone, dynamics, articulation, and intonation. These are the 4 most important pillars of instrument playing, vital for any musician who wants to sound excellent. These 4 things are the things that take basic songs and make them beautiful. They're the things that make the same performances of music over and over and over again unique. These are the things that make up expression. It is my opinion that once you have the very basics down of playing your instrument, you should start exploring expression. And it's the goal of today's video to scratch the surface of expression by teaching you how to control the first 3 of those aspects: tone, dynamics, and articulation. So let's get started. Tone, dynamics, and articulation are largely controlled by something we actually haven't talked about very much so far, and that is your embouchure, which is the fancy French word for lip formation. How you form your mouth and how you control your airstream is predominantly what affects the sound you get. Essentially, what you put into the flute determines what you get out of the flute. You can see this quite clearly. Put in a mess of air and you get out a mess of air. Put in a well-supported airstream and you get out a loud and powerful tone. But let's break these individual aspects of expression apart and look into how to use each individual one, starting with articulation. Within the realm of speaking, articulation is how you say the words, and that's a good way of thinking about it in a musical setting. When you breathe into your flute, there's a small build-up of air before the note solidifies, and that's a bit like mumbling or saying "whoo" into your flute. If what you want, however, is a nice, clear note, you're better off tonguing, which is where you use your tongue to release the airstream all at once, giving it a nice, clear beginning. This is essentially like saying "two." Try this now. Put your tongue to the roof of your mouth right below the bottom of your top teeth and say "two," but without vocalizing it, like you were whispering it. And now try doing this but directing the airstream into your flute as you were before. You can compare this with just breathing and saying "who" as well. You'll notice that tonguing like this produces a clearer note that's more individually identifiable. This is a very useful tool for making your notes sound clear and individual, especially when you're playing multiple notes back to back, or playing a note from the first octave to the second octave. As a result, you'll want to default to tonguing many of the notes that you play. However, it would sound very strange indeed if someone read a book to you while pronouncing every syllable this hard, and it's exactly the same with music. Enter slurs. Slurring on flute is where instead of tonguing every note, you only tongue the first note and then just continue breathing for all the others. An example of where this would make a lot of sense is the Lord of the Rings theme. This wouldn't make any sense to tongue every single note. As you can hear, disgusting. However, it also doesn't make very much sense to slur every note. The best option is found in a happy medium between the two. The next important thing to consider with regards to expression is dynamics, or how loudly or intensely you play. Again, with regards to speaking, talking at the same volume all the time doesn't really work very well for emotionally moving or easily understood speeches. In fact, it quickly gets quite boring, and the same is true for music. Now, as we know, the more air we blow into our flute, the louder it plays, and the less air we blow into our flute, the quieter. However, we also know that higher notes prefer faster air and lower notes prefer slower air. And that blowing faster into our flute is going to be blowing more air, and blowing slower is going to be blowing less air, so high notes are always louder than low notes, right? Well, not necessarily, but that certainly is a problem that we have to get around. Think of a straw. When you're blowing into a straw, the amount of air you can blow through the straw is limited by how big the straw is. And if you blow at the same speed into two different straws, one larger than the other, you'll lose air faster in the straw that's larger. In this same way, we can control our embouchure to blow more air or less air without having to change the speed or pressure of our breath. By making the hole in our mouth wider, we can blow more air and make a louder note. And by making it smaller, we can blow less air and make a quieter note. Then, by blowing a little harder or softer, we can exaggerate this dynamic range, allowing us to play super loudly or super quietly. Now, learning how to use your muscles to do this and then burning that into muscle memory can be a bit of a challenge and may require some practice. But it is well worth it, as once you achieve this, the room that you have for expression is increased dramatically. Again, if you are telling a story or reading a book, you'll do well to phrase it in a compelling way. By using dynamics to make some passages louder and some passages softer, you can make the story more engaging. Music works in the same way. In fact, we even use the same word to describe this: phrasing. Listen to this. By changing our volume and projection, we can convey a whole lot more emotional information in the music. Though, when we do this, we're not just making use of dynamics, we're also making use of tone. To continue the speaking metaphor, tone conveys a huge amount of information and gives a lot of context to what you're talking about. You can tell from someone's tone whether they are angry or scared, or whether a character's strong or weak, even how old they are, or whether they're male or female. And similarly, tone is prevalent on all instruments. Individual instruments carry their own identifiable tone. After all pianos sound like a piano. However, not all pianos sound like each other. And this is also true of most of the instruments, including the flute. Different flutes carry different tones depending on their construction and bore, depending on their embouchure hole and finger holes and the thickness, and also how they're played. You see, wind instruments are often able to change their tone, and flutes are especially good at this. Not good to the extent that they can sound like another instrument, but they certainly can be manipulated to have subtly or sometimes not so subtly different sounds. Unfortunately for this video series, different flutes with different embouchure holes tend to have different ideal ways of achieving different tone colors. So the best way for you to discover new tone colors is for you to experiment and try it yourself. However, here are some examples of broader tones and how you might be able to achieve them. If you want to play with power, you can do so by supporting your airstream. Now, this can be a difficult thing to pick up on first. I mean, what does that even mean? Now, if you've ever done singing, you may have learnt to sing from your chest instead of your throat or your head by engaging your core to support your lungs. Sometimes referred to as projecting, we do the same thing on flute in order to have a clear, stable, and powerful sound. It's worth looking for a video dedicated to teaching you breath support and projection, but to get you started, stand up tall and straight with good posture. Breathe from your stomach and engage your core to breathe out firmly and steadily. Using your core like this is key to achieving this support, which is extremely important if you want to achieve a myriad of different tone colors, as well as having clear, quiet notes and powerful, loud notes. Well, pushing your airstream right up to the point of going to the next harmonic, but without actually quite going to it, is how you end up with a reedy tone. A little obnoxious and very bright, this tone is your best way of cutting above other instruments, especially on the quieter low notes. Quiet notes don't have to be hollow. Remember how I said just a moment ago that you can support quiet notes to make them clear? By engaging your core, you can blow softer, but have a stable, thin sound. This sound is present and not as airy as a soft unsupported note, and so can be quite useful if you want your soft notes to still carry some expressive information. Remember that these are just examples of the many very different kinds of tone colors that you can have, so it's a good idea to play around on your flute and discover what sorts of sounds that you can make. You'll remember at the beginning of this video I mentioned intonation, or playing in tune. This is one of the most vital parts of playing good music, and so it's going to be the topic of the next video alongside advanced fingerings.